Wealth, fame, power. One man once held all three. His name was Goldie Roger, though almost no one in the world knew that middle initial, that single hidden letter D, a letter that would come to mean far more than anyone yet understood. To the world, he was simply Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, the only man ever to sail the Grand Line from one end to the other and reach the final island at the very end of it. There, at the end of the world, he found the treasure of treasures, the legendary hoard the world would come to call the One Piece. Roger had everything, and still the world government hunted him without rest, because a man who had seen the end of the world was a man far too dangerous to let live. In time, he was captured and he was brought to be executed in the town where he had been born. A town in the East Blue called Loketown, the town of the beginning and the end. They raised him up on the scaffold before an enormous crowd, expecting the king of the pirates to weep and beg for his life. He did not. When a voice in the crowd cried out, demanding to know where he had hidden his fabled treasure, Roger only smiled and spoke the words that would remake the world. "My wealth and treasures," he said. "If you want them, you can have them. Look for them. I left everything I own at that place." And then the executioner's blades came down, and the king of the pirates was gone. His final words did not frighten people away from the sea. They did the very opposite. That single sentence lit a fire in the hearts of dreamers all across the world, and they poured out onto the oceans by the thousands, every one of them chasing the same prize, all of them bound for the Grand Line in search of the One Piece. And so the world entered what history would call the Great Age of Pirates. Somewhere in that new age, a small boy was growing up who would one day take Roger's dream and make it his own. This is the story of Monkey D. Luffy and of the friends who chose to follow him, the Straw Hat Pirates. Our beginning is a quiet one in a small, peaceful town called Fuchsia Village on an island in that same gentle East Blue. There lived a boy named Luffy, 7 years old, loud, reckless, and utterly certain that he would grow up to be a great pirate. The reason for that certainty was anchored right there in the harbor. A crew of pirates had made the village their home port for a season, the red-haired pirates, led by an easygoing, red-haired captain named Shanks. To the villagers, Shanks was less a fearsome outlaw than a beloved regular at the local tavern, where a kind young barmaid named Makino kept his glass full. And to little Luffy, Shanks was a hero beyond all compare. Day after day, Luffy begged to join the crew, and day after day Shanks laughed him off, teasing that the boy couldn't even swim. Luffy, desperate to prove how tough he was, once grabbed a knife and stabbed himself just under the eye, leaving the small scar he would carry for the rest of his life. It didn't get him onto the ship. It did tell Shanks the boy was serious. Then Luffy did something that changed his life forever. On the tavern counter sat a treasure the pirates had plundered on their travels, a devil fruit. These fruits are among the strangest things in all the world. Eat one, and it grants you a bizarre, often astonishing power. But the sea takes its price. From that day on, a devil fruit user can never swim again, and the moment their body touches seawater, their strength drains away entirely. Luffy, knowing none of this, ate the whole fruit in a fit of pride, thinking it just an odd-tasting snack. It was the gum-gum fruit, and it turned his entire body to rubber, stretching, bouncing, shrugging off blows and even bullets, and forever unable to swim. Not long after, that brand new life was nearly ended. A band of mountain bandits led by a brute named Higuma, a man with a bounty of his own, swaggered into the tavern and humiliated Shanks to his face, smashing a bottle over his head and wasting his drink and mocking him for a coward. Shanks simply laughed it off and helped mop up the mess. Luffy couldn't understand it. He burned with shame that his hero would sit there and take such an insult. But Shanks understood something the boy did not. That true strength has nothing to prove over spilled sake, and that a real man does not raise his fists over an insult. The bandits, though, were not finished. They seized Luffy, carried him out onto the open water, and hurled him in, and Luffy, unable now to swim, began to sink, just as a monstrous sea king, the lord of the coast, rose from the deep to swallow him whole. In an instant Shanks was there. He crossed the water in a single heartbeat, drove the great beast off with nothing but one terrifying glare, and pulled the boy to safety. But the Sea King's jaws had closed on him, and when Shanks stood in the shallows cradling Luffy, one of his arms was gone. His left arm, taken clean off at the shoulder. Luffy burst into tears, sobbing that it was all his fault. Shanks, bleeding and grinning, told him not to cry. "It's just an arm," he said. "I'm glad you're alive." A limb, he meant, was a small price to pay for a friend's life. The very lesson he had tried to teach over the bandits, now written into Luffy's heart forever. When the red-haired pirates at last weighed anchor for good, Shanks gave Luffy a parting gift, the treasured straw hat that always sat upon his own head. He set it gently on the boy and spoke the words that would define the rest of Luffy's life. "This hat is very precious to me," Shanks told him. "I'm giving it to you. Promise me you'll return it one day, once you've become a great pirate." And Luffy, tears streaming down his face, made a bolder promise still. He would not merely become a great pirate. He would gather a crew of his very own, sail to the greatest treasure in all the world, and become the king of the pirates, greater even than Shanks himself. And then, one day, he would give the hat back. Shanks only smiled and sailed away over the horizon. Luffy kept that hat and that promise close to his heart for 10 long years. 10 years later, Luffy was 17, and the time had come. He rowed out from Fuchsia in a tiny boat, pointed himself at the open horizon, with no map, no navigator, and not a single doubt. Almost at once, a whirlpool swallowed his little boat whole, and he survived only by sealing himself inside a drifting barrel. That barrel was hauled aboard a passing ship. A ship belonging to a pirate named Alvida. Iron Mace Alvida was a cruel, enormous, vain woman who forced her crew to swear she was the most beautiful creature on the seas, and beat them bloody when they hesitated. Among that terrified crew was a soft, gentle, cowardly boy named Kobe, kept as little more than a chore boy and a slave, too frightened to run. When Luffy burst out of the barrel, the two of them became fast, unlikely friends, and Kobe confessed a dream he had never once dared to speak aloud. He wanted to be a marine, one of the sailors who keep order on the sea and protect the weak. Luffy's fearlessness was contagious. When Alvida loomed over the two of them and demanded to know who was the most beautiful woman on all the ocean, Kobe, trembling, terrified, but finally, at last, brave, screamed that she was nothing but a fat old hag. It was the first honest, courageous thing he had ever done. Luffy sent Alvida flying with a single stretching, rubber punch, and both boys had taken their very first step toward their dreams. Luffy left Kobe near a marine base at a place called Shellstown where the boy could finally enlist. But that base held someone Luffy was far more interested in. A prisoner lashed to a wooden post out in the courtyard, a man whose name was already whispered with dread all across the East Blue. The pirate hunter, Roronoa Zoro. Zoro was a bounty hunter so dangerous that the Marines had strung him up in the burning sun to break his spirit. But the true villain of that town was not Zoro at all. It was the base's own commander, the cruel and towering Captain Axe-Hand Morgan, a man with a literal steel axe for a hand and a monstrous pride to match, and his spoiled, cowardly son, Helmeppo, who lorded over the townsfolk and took whatever he pleased. The reason Zoro hung from that post told you everything you needed to know about him. Helmeppo had let his vicious pet wolf run loose in a town, and when it lunged to attack a little girl named Rika, Zoro had cut the beast down to save her life. For that, Helmeppo had him arrested and offshore lying bargain, survive 1 full month tied to the post, with no food and no water, and he would go free. Helmeppo never meant to keep his word, and the little girl Rika, sick with guilt that a man was dying for her sake, crept into the courtyard with rice balls she had made herself to keep him alive. Helmeppo's soldiers knocked them from her hands and ground them into the dirt beneath their boots. And Zoro, starving, filthy, humiliated, asked the crying girl for what was left and ate the trampled, muddy rice balls right off the ground, then told her to tell no one, but that they were the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. That was the man Luffy decided, on the spot, that he wanted as his very first crewmate. Zoro refused at first. He had no wish to stain his name by turning pirate, but he carried a dream every bit as large as Luffy's own. He intended to become the greatest swordsman in the entire world. So the two struck a bargain. Luffy would free him, and Zoro would sail with him, but if the crew ever came between him and that ambition, he would take up his swords and leave. That dream ran deep, all the way back to his childhood. Zoro had trained at a dojo where only one person could ever beat him, a girl named Quina, the dojo master's daughter, and the finest young swordsman he had ever crossed blades with. She defeated him 2,000 times and more, and yet the two of them were the closest of rivals and friends. One night, Quina confided a bitter fear that the world would never let a girl become the greatest swordsman alive, and the two children swore a fierce promise to each other in the dark. One of them would grow up to earn that title no matter what. And then, senselessly, cruelly, Quina died. A simple fall down a flight of stairs, gone before she ever had the chance to try. Zoro, hollow with grief, asked her father to let him carry her sword, a beautiful white blade named Wado Ichimonji, and he swore to carry both their dreams as one. He would grow so mighty that his very name would climb to the heavens, so that wherever Quina was watching from, she would hear it and know he had kept his word. That vow lived beneath everything he did. The fight against Morgan was swift once Luffy joined it. Luffy tore Zoro free. Zoro took up his three swords once more, his own strange art of a blade gripped in each hand and a third clenched between his teeth, the three-sword style, and together they toppled the tyrant captain. The whole town was free at last, and Kobe, standing up bravely to Morgan himself in the final hour, proved he was ready to become a Marine after all. The pirate and the future Marine said a warm, difficult goodbye, each of them bound now for opposite sides of the coming age. And Luffy sailed on, a crew of two, with a first mate the entire sea had learned to fear. Luffy needed a navigator, and the one he found wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. In a shattered, half-ruined town called Orange Town, the two Straw Hats crossed paths with a sharp young woman named Nami, a cat burglar, and a brilliant one who robbed pirates for a living and could read the sky and the sea like no one else in all the East Blue. She hated pirates with a cold, quiet, burning fury, and so, of course, she refused outright to join. But again and again, fate threw the two of them together. The reason Orange Town lay in ruins was a pirate named Buggy the Clown. Buggy had eaten the chop-chop fruit, a power that let him split his body into separate floating pieces, which made him nearly impossible to cut down. He rolled the town through cannon fire and terror, backed by a crew of oddities. The beast tamer Moji and his great lion Richie, and the acrobat swordsman Kabaji, and he lobbed explosive buggy balls from a cannon at anything that displeased him. Nami had cleverly wormed her way into his crew to steal his map of the Grand Line and his hoard of treasure. And here's a small thing that would one day matter enormously. Long, long ago, this ridiculous clown and the great red-haired Shanks had both been cabin boys together, side by side aboard the ship of Gold Roger himself. Buggy had sailed with the king of the pirates. No one who watched him rage and stomp would ever have guessed it. The clash set a pattern that would echo through the whole of Luffy's journey. Faced with a cruel enemy who believed that fear ruled over all things, Luffy simply refused to be afraid. When Buggy sneered and demanded to know just who this idiot thought he was, Luffy answered without so much as a flicker of doubt, he was the man who would become the king of the pirates. To Buggy, who had watched the real Pirate King live and die with his own eyes, it was the vilest blasphemy, and he swore to kill the boy for it. Along the way, Luffy showed Nami something she had long ago stopped believing in. There was a small white dog named Chow Chow who stood guard over a tiny wrecked pet food shop, refusing to leave his post even though his owner had died, because that little shop had been his master's whole treasure. When one of Buggy's men destroyed the shop and mocked the dog for guarding a pile of ashes, Luffy beat the man bloody and, without a word, pressed the single surviving scrap of food gently into the grieving dog's mouth. Even the town's stubborn old mayor, Boodle, found the courage to take up a weapon and stand for the home he loved. It was all small, and it told Nami, quietly, that this reckless idiot understood something true about what treasure really means. In the end, Luffy launched Buggy clean out of the town in a single blow, and Nami, still insisting she was only using them, still fully intending to rob them blind the moment it suited her, agreed to sail with the crew as their navigator. The crew's next port was a peaceful little seaside village near Syrup, and there they met the boy who would one day become the very heart of the crew's courage, Usopp. Usopp was the village liar, a long-nosed teenager who tore through the streets every single morning bellowing that pirates were coming purely for the reaction. No one believed a word he said. He even had a tiny gang of 3 small children, the self-styled Usopp Pirates, who worshipped his tall tales. But there was far more to the boy than that. His father, Yasopp, had gone off to sea years before to join a pirate crew, and, in a quiet twist of fate, that crew was Shanks's very own. Usopp's absent father was one of the red-haired pirates, and beneath all the lies and the bluster, Usopp dreamed of becoming a brave warrior of the sea, exactly like the father he barely remembered. One person always listened to his ridiculous stories with a gentle smile, a kind, wealthy, bedridden girl named Kaya, who lived alone in a great mansion after the death of both her parents. Usopp came by daily to lift her spirits with his invented adventures. What neither of them realized was that Kaya was in terrible danger, and that this time the pirates truly were coming. Kaya's trusted butler, the stiff and proper Klahadore, was not at all what he seemed. He was, in truth, a notorious pirate captain, Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates, a schemer so cold and meticulous that they called him Kuro of 1,000 plans. Years earlier, he had faked his own capture and execution, letting another man die in his place under his name, all to vanish forever from the pirate's life and set up one final, flawless scheme. He had spent 3 long years as the perfect, devoted servant, and now he meant to have Kaya murdered and to forge a will that handed him her entire fortune. His old crew waited just offshore. The strange cat brothers, Sham and Bucci, and a hypnotist named Janko, whose swinging ring could lull anyone to sleep, and who would make the killing look like a tragic accident. Usopp overheard the whole terrible plot, and he did the only thing he knew how to do. He ran through town screaming that pirates were coming to murder Kaya. And no one, not one single soul, believed the boy who had cried wolf 1,000 times. So Usopp made the choice that would change him forever. It did not matter that no one believed him. He would defend the village and the girl he cared for alone, if that was what it took. Luffy, Zoro, and Nami, seeing something of their own hearts in this lonely, boastful, good-hearted boy, chose to stand beside him. Together they fought Kuro's pirates on the long sloping path that led down to the shore, and there, in that battle, Usopp found his true courage. He was no swordsman and no brawler. His only weapons were a slingshot and a bag of clever tricks, and he was frightened out of his wits the entire time, and he stood and fought anyway. That, the story quietly insists, is exactly what bravery is. When Kuro at last unleashed his monstrous, blinding speed, it was Luffy who brought the cold schemer down for good. Kaya recovered, in body and in spirit, and to thank the crew she gave them the one thing they needed most in all the world, a real ship. A small, sturdy caravel with the head of a sheep carved at its prow, designed by the mansion's kindly old steward, a gentleman named Mary. And so they named her the Going Mary. As they pushed off from the shore, a familiar figure came sprinting down the hill and flung himself aboard. Usopp, unable to bear watching them sail away without him, had decided to chase his dream after all. He became the crew's sniper and its self-appointed captain of tall tales, off at last to become a brave warrior of the sea. Out on the open water floated one of the strangest landmarks in all the East Blue, an ocean-going restaurant built in the shape of a great fish, called the Barati. Luffy blundered into it, caused a great deal of damage in a careless scuffle, and was sentenced to work off the debt as a lowly busboy. And it was there that he met the cook who would complete the first heart of his crew, a sharp-tongued, chain-smoking, fiercely chivalrous young man named Sanji. Sanji fought with his legs alone and never his hands, for a cook's hands are meant for cooking and must never be shattered in a brawl. He was hopelessly courteous to every woman alive and hopelessly rude to nearly every man, and beneath all of that he carried a dream as wide and deep as the ocean itself to find the all-blue. It was a sea spoken of only in old rumor, a place where the fish of all 4 oceans gathered together in one single sea. To a chef, it would be paradise on earth. That dream, and Sanji's furious refusal to ever let a hungry soul go unfed, was born from his childhood. As a boy, Sanji had worked in the kitchen of a fine passenger ship when a savage storm and a pirate raid sank everything at once. A pirate named Zeph, the dreaded Red-Leg Zeph, a great and feared captain in his own right, dove into that raging sea and dragged the drowning boy to shore, and the 2 of them washed up stranded together on a barren spit of rock with only a single sack of food between them. Zeph gave the entire sack to the boy and told him gruffly that he had his own. Day after starving day, the boy survived on it, hating the old pirate bitterly for refusing to share. But when at last they were rescued, Sanji learned the unbearable truth. Zeph's sack had held no food at all, not a single crumb. To keep himself alive without ever once touching the boy's share, Zeph had eaten his own leg. He had given Sanji everything, and paid for it with part of his own body, which was why he walked on a wooden peg leg ever after. That was why Sanji would never, ever waste even a scrap of food, and why he would feed even a starving enemy who begged at his door. A cook, he believed with his whole heart, does not let people die of hunger. Rescued and healed, the gruff old pirate and the boy he had saved opened the Barati together, and there Sanji grew up, trading insults and love with the man who had given him his leg. Into this floating restaurant sailed catastrophe. First came a half-dead, starving pirate named Jin, and Sanji, true to his nature, fed the man without a second thought. Jin's captain followed close behind, Don Krieg, an armored warlord who commanded the single largest pirate fleet in the entire East Blue. Krieg had just crawled home in ruins from the Grand Line, his whole vast armada shattered in a single week, and now he meant to repay the very meal that had saved his life by slaughtering everyone aboard and stealing the ship for himself. The cooks, led by Sanji, refused to run a single step. But it was what had followed Krieg home that mattered most of all. His entire fleet had been broken on the Grand Line by one single man, and that man had trailed him all the way back here out of nothing but idle boredom. Dracule Mihawk, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, an elite handful of pirates whose crimes the world government itself had pardoned in exchange for their loyalty, and the greatest swordsman in all the world. For Zoro, here at last was the very mountain he had sworn to climb, standing impossibly before him this early in the journey, the one man whose title he intended to seize. Zoro challenged him at once. Mihawk was so wholly unimpressed that he would not even draw his enormous black blade. He met Zoro with nothing but a tiny cross-shaped dagger, and with it he turned aside every furious blow the swordsman could throw. And when Zoro poured every last ounce of his strength into one final technique, Mihawk broke 2 of his 3 swords and cut a deep, terrible wound across his chest. Zoro stood swaying at the very edge of death, and Mihawk offered him the chance to fall backward and save his own life. Zoro refused. He turned instead to face the killing stroke head-on, his arms spread wide, because, he said, a wound upon a swordsman's back is a swordsman's deepest shame. It is proof that he ran. For the first time, Mihawk was truly moved. He struck Zoro down, but he stayed his hand from the kill. "It's still too early for you to die," he told the young man, and asked to know his name. "Grow strong. Surpass this sword," Mihawk said. "Surpass me," Roronoa Zoro. "I will be waiting." Bleeding on the deck, Zoro raised his one surviving blade, Queena's white sword, high into the sky, and made his bow aloud, this time to his captain. Until the day he defeated that man and became the world's greatest swordsman, he would never lose again, never suffer another defeat as long as he lived. Did the future king of the pirates have any complaint about a first mate like that? Luffy, grinning ear to ear, said none at all. The battle with Krieg fell to Luffy, and he won it the only way he ever won anything, by refusing again and again to stay down. And when it was over, Sanji faced the hardest choice of his life. Luffy wanted him for the crew, but Sanji felt bound by love and debt to stay and care for the old man who had raised him and given up so much. Zeph would have none of it. Gruffly, harshly, with all his love buried deep beneath the insults, the old cook told Sanji to go, to chase the All Blue, to live his own life, and to stop throwing it away out of guilt. And so Sanji finally left, and as the Going Merry pulled slowly away, he dropped to his knees on the deck and wept, shouting his thanks across the water to the old man who had eaten his own leg to keep a hungry boy alive, while the entire staff of the Bharati stood and bowed to see him off. The crew had its cook. And then, without a word, the navigator vanished. Nami stole the Going Merry, took the crew's money, and sailed off alone, back to the one place in all the world she had sworn she would only ever return to on her own terms. Two of Zoro's old bounty hunter friends, a pair of small-time brothers named Johnny and Yosaku, who had been traveling along with the crew, knew where she had gone, and they led the Straw Hats to follow her. And there, at last, Luffy and the others learned who Nami truly was. Her home was Kokoyashi village, and for years it had suffered beneath the boot of a crew of fishmen, a proud and powerful race, born far stronger by nature than any human being, led by a saw-toothed shark fishman named Arlong. Arlong despised all of humankind. He believed with his whole soul that fishmen were a superior species with every right to rule over people as their masters, and he ran the entire region as a tyrant, taking tribute from every village at the edge of a blade. Nami had been only a small child when he came. She and her older sister, Nojiko, were orphans, taken in and raised by a fierce, loving former marine named Belmere, a woman who owned almost nothing in the world, but who chose to raise two children she had found in a war zone as her own daughters. They were poor, and they were happy. Then Arlong's fishmen arrived and demanded their tribute, a set price for every adult and a price for every child. Belmere had barely enough hidden away to save a single life, her own. She could so easily have denied that Nami and Nojiko were hers, and lived. Instead, without a heartbeat of hesitation, she claimed them proudly and openly as her daughters, because a mother does not disown her children to save herself. Arlong shot her dead where she stood, in front of the two little girls. Her very last words were to tell them that she loved them. But Arlong had noticed something rare about the young Nami, an extraordinary once-in-a-generation gift for reading the sea and drawing maps. So he took her prisoner and chained her to a desk in a room at the top of his fortress and forced her to chart the oceans for his grand ambitions of conquest. And he offered her one single cruel bargain, bring him 100 million berries, an almost unimaginable fortune, and he would sell her village its freedom. So Nami made a devil's bargain with the very man who had murdered her mother. For years and years she served him, robbing every pirate she could find, hoarding away every last coin, drawing agonizingly, slowly closer to buying back her home and her family. That was the real reason she hated all pirates. That was the real reason she had used the Straw Hats from the very start. And then, when she was at last almost there, when she had very nearly gathered the full 100 million, a corrupt marine officer named Captain Nizumi, secretly in Arlong's pocket, raided her hidden savings and stole away every last berry. It had been Arlong's design from the beginning. He had never once intended to keep his word. Her village would never be free. And Nami broke. Alone at the water's edge, she took a knife to the hated tattoo of Arlong's crew branded upon her shoulder, and she stabbed at it, as though she could carve away all the stolen years. Luffy caught her wrist and stopped her. And Nami, the proud, self-reliant thief who had never once in her life asked another soul for a single thing, finally, in a small and broken voice, asked for help. "Luffy," she said, "help me." Luffy said nothing at all at first. He simply walked to her, lifted the straw hat from his own head, Shanks's hat, his single most precious treasure in all the world, set it gently down upon hers, and said the only thing that needed saying, "Of course I will." The Straw Hats went to war with Arlong Park. Zoro, still torn open from his duel with Mihawk, took on the six-sworded octopus fishman Hatchin, Sanji fought the ray fishman Karubi, Usopp outfoxed the sharpshooter Chu, and Luffy climbed alone to the room at the very top of the fortress to face Arlong himself. The very same room where Nami had been chained for all those years, forced to draw maps for the fishman who had killed her mother. Luffy took everything Arlong could throw at him, and then he brought the entire tower crashing down around them both, smashing that hateful room to dust, roaring that Nami was his Nakama, his crewmate, and that no one, ever again, would chain her to that desk. When it was finally over, Nami stood in the ruins and wept, and for the first time in a great many years there was no pain at all in her tears. She was free, her whole village was free. And as the crew turned to leave, she came running after them and leapt aboard the ship laughing, joining them for real at last, no longer a thief using them, but one of them, heart and soul. Where Arlong's brand had scarred her shoulder, she chose a new mark to wear in its place, a pinwheel and a tangerine, for Belmere and for the home she had finally truly saved. And soon after, the wider world took its first real notice of the boy in the straw hat. The Marines issued Luffy his very first bounty, 30 million berries, a staggering sum for an unknown rookie out of the weakest of the four seas. He was a wanted man now, and his legend had only just begun. There was one last stop to make before the true journey could begin, and its name we already know. To reach the Grand Line, the Straw Hats first had to sail to Lopetown, the town where Gold Roger had been born, and the very town where he had been executed. The town of the beginning and the end. The crew scattered through the streets to make ready. Nami and Sanji stalked the ship for the crossing. Zoro, who had lost 2 of his 3 swords to Mihawk's black blade, went hunting for new ones and found a shop where he tested a cursed sword named Sandai Kotetsu, a blade said to doom whoever dared to wield it. By tossing it spinning up into the air and holding out his own bare arm beneath it, daring his luck to fail. The blade fell and missed his arm. He decided that his fortune and the sword's curse could simply fight it out between them, and he took it, along with a fine blade named Yubashiri that the odd old shopkeeper pressed into his hands for free, once he realized this young man still carried the legendary Wado Ichimonji. And there in that shop, Zoro met a clumsy, sword-loving young Marine officer named Tashigi, a girl who wore glasses and tripped over her own feet, and who looked so exactly like his lost friend Kuina that the sight of her shook him to his core. He would cross paths with her again. She served, as it happened, under the very Marine who was about to change everything. For Luffy, meanwhile, was drawn to one place above all the others, the execution platform standing in the town square, the very scaffold where the king of the pirates had met his end. He climbed up to stand exactly where Roger had once stood, and there fate closed a circle around him. 2 old enemies lay in wait, Buggy the Clown and Alvida, allied now, both hungry for revenge. They seized Luffy on the platform and bound him fast, and Buggy raised his blade to execute the future pirate king in the precise spot where the last one had fallen. Down in the crowd stood a Marine captain named Smoker, a hard, sharp-eyed man whose devil fruit turned his body into smoke, and who had spent his entire life fascinated by the strange legacy of Gold Roger. He watched, and he waited to see the boy's fear. But as the blade came down, Luffy did the one thing that Smoker never expected. He grinned. Bound, about to die, seated in the very place of the Pirate King's death, Luffy simply drew back his head and laughed. The same fearless, delighted grin the old history said that Roger himself had worn at the very end. And in that instant, a great bolt of lightning split the sky and shattered the platform to splinters, and Luffy walked out of the smoke alive, his bonds burned clean away. To the superstitious souls in that square, it looked for all the world as though the heavens themselves had reached down and refused to let the boy die. Smoker gave chase through the rain-soaked streets, fast enough and strong enough to run down even Luffy, until a mysterious cloaked stranger stepped calmly into his path and would not let him pass, buying the Straw Hats their escape. No one knew the stranger's name that day. He watched Luffy vanish into the storm and murmured, almost to himself, that the winds of the world were beginning to change. The world would learn who he was only much later, Monkey D. Dragon, the single most wanted man alive, the leader of a growing revolution against the world government itself, and, though no living soul yet knew it, Luffy's very own father. The storm that broke over Logtown was the gateway to everything that followed. The Straw Hats fought their way back to the Going Merry and rolled out onto a raging sea, pointed now toward the towering Reverse Mountain and the entrance to the Grand Line. And before they crossed, the 5 of them stood together upon the deck and made a vow. Each of them set a single foot up on a barrel, and one by one they spoke their dreams aloud into the howling storm. To find the All Blue, to become the world's greatest swordsman, to draw a complete map of the entire world, to become a brave warrior of the sea, and, above and beyond all the rest, to find the One Piece and become the king of the pirates. You do not simply sail into the Grand Line. There is only one safe way in, and it is one of the strangest sights in all the world, Reverse Mountain, where the Red Line, that vast continent which circles the whole of the planet, meets the belt of the Grand Line. All 4 of the seas rush upward against every law of nature, climbing the mountain in great roaring canals of white water. A ship rides those canals up one impossible slope and then plunges straight down the other side, and a single mistake at the helm smashes it to kindling upon the rocks. Nami read the currents, the whole crew held their nerve, and their little Going Merry was flung up the mountain and hurled down at last into the Grand Line. They arrived to a sound like rolling thunder, and then they saw it, a mountain that moved. Rising up out of the water at the very foot of Reverse Mountain was a whale so utterly colossal that it blotted out the entire sky, its black hide a mess of old scars, its low and mournful cry shaking the whole of the sea. It was called Laboon, and it was so enormous that the crew's first ridiculous crisis was simply not being swallowed whole. In the chaos, the Going Merry was nearly wrecked, and Luffy, fearless as ever, ran straight up the whale's head and punched it square between the eyes, promising to fight it fair and square. An old man lived there, in a lighthouse built at the very mouth of the Grand Line, a calm, white-bearded doctor named Crocus. And here is a detail worth holding on to, for it will come to matter greatly one day. This old lighthouse keeper had once, long ago, been the doctor aboard the ship of Gold Roger himself. Crocus told the crew the sorrow behind the whale's endless crying, and it is one of the gentlest, saddest stories in all of these seas. 50 years before, a crew of pirates had come up and over Reverse Mountain, and Laboon, then only a whale calf, had followed their ship and befriended them. The pirates came to love the little whale dearly, but the Grand Line was far too dangerous a place for it, and so they left Laboon behind at the lighthouse with a solemn promise they would sail all the way around the world and then they would come back for him. Whales are patient creatures. Laboon waited. He waited so long and rammed his head against the sheer cliff of the Red Line so many thousands of times trying to reach the friends he believed were on the far side that his whole great body became a map of scars. Those pirates, Crocus knew, had died out on the Grand Line long, long ago. They were never, ever coming back. But he could not bear to be the one to tell the whale, and so Laboon waited on, year after year, crying out across the water for a crew that would never return. Luffy understood something about promises. He could not undo the whale's long grief, but he could give it something new to wait for. He took up a bucket of paint and drew his crew's mark, the Straw Hat flag, right across Laboon's scarred forehead, and he made the great whale a brand new promise. The Straw Hats would sail all the way around the Grand Line, conquer it from end to end, and then they would come back to this very spot to finish their fight. Laboon had only to wait a little while longer, this time for someone who truly, honestly meant to return. And the whale, for the first time in 50 long years, seemed at last to understand. It was a small and simple kindness set against a very old sorrow, and it told you everything you needed to know about the kind of captain Luffy was. From Crocus, the crew also learned the hard law of this strange ocean. On the Grand Line, an ordinary compass spins forever, uselessly, because the very islands themselves are magnetic and pull the needle every which way at once. To travel here at all, you need a special device called a log pose, which slowly locks onto the magnetic field of one island and then points the way onward to the next. You cannot simply choose your own path. You follow the log from island to island, wherever it happens to lead, all the way around the world. So, with a log pose in hand and the great whale watching them go, the Straw Hats set their course for the very first island the needle chose. The first island was a bizarre place of towering, cactus-shaped spires of rock, a town called Whiskey Peak. And to the crew's utter astonishment, the townspeople greeted them as conquering heroes, throwing a colossal party, cheering their arrival, pressing food and drink upon them, hailing them as brave and famous adventurers. Nami and Luffy and the others threw themselves gladly into the feast. It all seemed far too good to be true. And it was. Zoro alone did not touch a single drop. He had noticed what the others, lost in the celebration, had entirely missed, that the whole warm welcome was a trap. Whiskey Peak was a town of bounty hunters, every last smiling villager a trained killer, and the great party was simply the way they lulled visiting pirates into a deep sleep before robbing and murdering them for the rewards on their heads. When the town's true faces finally came out under the light of the moon, a full 100 armed bounty hunters closing in silently upon the sleeping crew, it was Zoro who rose to meet them, entirely alone, out in the graveyard at the town's heart, and cut down every last one of them without so much as breaking a sweat, making it very plain that these particular Straw Hats were not the easy prey the town was accustomed to. But these were no ordinary bounty hunters. Whiskey Peak was itself a front, an outpost of a vast and secret criminal syndicate called Baroque Works, an organization of assassins and agents known to one another only by code names and numbers, all of them serving a single hidden boss whose true identity almost none of them had ever learned. 2 of its senior agents were there that night, a graceful, blue-haired woman who called herself Miss Wednesday, and a strange, curly-haired man called Mr. 8, and when all the dust had settled, their real secret came apart. They were not, in truth, agents of Baroque Works at all. The woman's true name was Nefertari Vivi, and she was a princess, the crown princess of a great and ancient desert kingdom on the Grand Line called Alabasta. Mr. 8 was in truth her loyal royal guard, a man named Igaram. For years, the 2 of them had risked their very lives under cover, climbing the ranks of Baroque Works with one single desperate purpose, to uncover the identity of its hidden leader. And they had finally, at terrible cost, succeeded. What they had learned was enough to freeze the blood. The boss of Baroque Works, the man they knew only as Mr. Zero, was Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. He was an elite pirate so powerful and so respected that the world government had pardoned all his crimes in exchange for his loyalty, a celebrated public hero, and a secret, patient monster. And Crocodile was turning his entire criminal army against the desert kingdom of Alabasta, quietly engineering a great rebellion to topple its beloved king, so that amid all the chaos he might seize the whole country for himself. There was one more shadow moving through that night. As the truth spilled out, another figure watched it all from the very edges. A calm, dark-haired, mysterious woman who called herself Miss All Sunday. She was the vice president of the whole of Baroque Works, and the only person alive who truly knew the boss's face. She had quietly allowed Vivi's dangerous investigation to succeed, for reasons entirely her own that no one could yet even begin to guess, and then she slipped away into the dark without ever lifting a hand. Remember her well. Her real name was Nico Robin, and her long road and the road of the Straw Hats were only just beginning to cross. Now Vivi's cover was blown wide open, and Baroque Works would stop at absolutely nothing to bury its secret forever. Its deadliest agents were already being dispatched to silence her before she could ever reach home and warn her father the king. A single princess, alone against a warlord's private army, carrying a secret that could either save or utterly doom an entire nation. and the only ship in reach was a little caravel with the head of a sheep carved upon its prow. Loyal Igaram disguised himself as the princess and sailed off as a decoy to draw the killers away, and though his ship was blown apart behind them, his sacrifice bought Vivi her chance. The Straw Hats did not hesitate for very long. Luffy was never once in his life able to walk past someone fighting to save their home, least of all in the very way that Nami had once fought to save hers. The crew took Princess Vivi aboard the Going Merry and set their course, at last, for the great desert kingdom of Alabasta, sailing straight into a hidden war against one of the single most powerful pirates in all the world. And that is where we will leave them for tonight. 5 friends and a runaway princess, one small ship cutting quietly across a strange new ocean, bound for a distant country of sand and rebellion, with a warlord waiting patiently at the end of the long road. Let's take a slow breath together and remember just how far we have come. A small boy who ate a devil fruit and turned to rubber, who was given a straw hat and an impossible dream by the man he loved most in all the world. A swordsman carrying the promise of a lost friend all the way up to the heavens. A navigator who learned at long last how to trust again after a whole childhood of grief. A liar who found his courage on a lonely slope. A cook chasing a legendary sea to the ends of the earth. 5 dreamers who each spoke their dream aloud into a howling storm and then sailed straight into the deadliest waters in the world without a single shred of doubt in their hearts. The Desert Kingdom, the Warlord Crocodile, the long war for Alabasta, and all the many friends and enemies still waiting quietly in the dark ahead, all of it lies before us in the chapters yet to come. But there is no need at all to rush toward any of it now. For tonight, simply let the little ship sail on, through calm and gentle water beneath a wide and quiet sky, 5 dreamers and a princess carried softly forward by the very same promise, rest easy. The Grand Line will still be there, waiting when you wake.